Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening on the Type 1 Annual Certificates webinar for end-of-year pension processes. My name is Debbie Roberts and I work in the communications team at PCSE and I'll be facilitating this evening's session. Okay, so just to let you know who we've got on the call this evening. So from PCSE, we've got Katrina Veneris, and Katrina works on the GP pensions team. And then you've got myself, Debbie Roberts, and Kat Van Peris from the PCSE communications team. We've also got Christian Agual from the BMA, who's going to be supporting where he can with questions and answers, and he's the Deputy Chair of the Pensions Committee. And we've also got Janet Knox from NHS England, who's the Performance and Assurance Senior Manager, and Janet's also going to be helping out with questions where she can as well. Okay, so I'll just have a quick look at the agenda then. So this evening, we're going to look at the employer contribution statements in PCSE Online. We're going to have a look at the 2022 and 2023 changes and having a look at how we complete those forms in PCSE Online. We'll discuss under or overpayments of contributions, and we're also going to have a look at some of the questions that were asked in the previous session and provide answers to those. And then once we've done all that, we will jump to a live Q&A.
Thank you, Debbie, and good evening, everyone. As Debbie says, we're going to give you some information, some content, just to go through the key processes that are involved in your Type 1 submission and try and link in with a number of the questions that were the sort of most frequently asked points, but also give you an opportunity to ask any additional questions this evening that we might not have already covered for you. To recap on who has to complete a Type 1 annual certificate. So a GP who is a partner in a practice or a non-GP partner needs to complete a Type 1 form. If the GP has also been a salaried GP in that year, so perhaps have switched from salaried to partner at one point, or even vice versa, then for that particular year they need to complete two separate forms, so one Type 1 form for their partner role and a Type 2 form for the salaried role. When it comes to the 22-23 certificates, then as a unique scenario, then the tier rates for pension contributions changed from the 1st of October, so exactly mid that pension year, and that means that the forms do look a bit different for this 2022-23 pension year than they did for the previous years, and indeed when we get to the 23-24 round next up, then it'll be back to being a little bit more like those previous years, but we have got a sort of unique scenario for this year. Okay, so before we get into the certificate itself, we're going to take a look at the employee contribution statement, which is a key part of the PCSE Online functionality for pension scheme members. Before I start an annual certificate, then I will look at my employee contribution statement for the year. So on PCSE Online, if I click employee contribution statement, and then I can select the year in question, so 22-23. If I click search, then all of my income contributions that has been recorded on PCSE Online for the year will now appear on screen. I can filter that, so if I want to first of all look at the profit share from my practice, contributions paid on that so far through the estimate process, then I can search and filter, so that will show me all of the months for the year. And similarly, I can filter on solo, and we'll see that I've done some solo work in May and June 22, so the first half of the pension year, and that's the only solo work that I've done. If I go back to all of my income, then importantly, I have a couple of buttons at the bottom. Download as a PDF or download as a CSV. So if I'm going to use an accountant to prepare my Type 1 certificate for me, or an advisor, then I will want to just click download CSV, and that will immediately provide me a file with all of these contributions that I can share with my accountant. So strongly suggest that people do that before their accountant actually prepares the certificate. Okay, so when we went through the questions that we received in the last Type 1 webinar, then quite a few of them were actually related to hurdles that people had come across or just clarifications that they wanted to know about in relation more to the employee contribution statement, so even before they got as far as the Type 1 form. So we've brought a few of these questions in at this point this evening. First one, I guess, is someone who's been unable to select 22-23 in the drop down. So they've gone into the employee contribution statement and there is no option to select that. Now that will tend to be someone who has joined a practice at some point, probably during 22-23, potentially before that, but normally in that year, and they've started working at the practice as a partner, but the whole process to initiate pension contributions as monthly deductions from the practice hasn't actually been completed, or the end-to-end process hasn't been completed. So the first thing that the GP needs to do, if this is a GP partner, is to just check their own PCSE Online login and go to their performer record part or the performer list button on PCSE Online and check that the employment change that they submitted when they started at the practice as a partner has been approved by the practice and ICB. If that's showing is approved, then you need to speak to the practice manager to get them to complete the pensions joiner form, and that form is where the practice confirms, yes, the date that you started as a partner, but also what the estimated income or estimated pensionable pay anyway and tier rates are for the year. When they do that and when that's submitted through PCSE Online, then that's what initiates the commencement of the pension contributions for the GP partner who started. Now, if this is now something that's being done retrospectively because it happened, you know, you've started there at some point in 22-23, then the pensions joiner form can be backdated to the 1st of April of the previous pension year. So as we're sitting here now in March still, then if indeed you started on the 1st of April 2022, as far back as that, then the practice can actually submit the joiner form. What they then need to be aware of is that by submitting that joiner form, then the calculations that are due for the periods from the date you started to bring everything right up to date, they will automatically be deducted in the next contractual payment. When they've submitted that joiner form and you know, put that backdated date in, you would then be able to see when you log in to PCSE Online that your 22-23 option is available and that you can then search for the employee contribution statement details for that year. So those steps need to be done in the first instance. If you go to your performer list part of your PCSE Online screen when you log in, and either you've got your employment change that you submitted but it's still pending, then that means that either the practice or the ICB have still to approve it, so that needs to be chased up first. And when that approval's done, then the practice manager or administrator who looks after the pension side of things then needs to log in and do the joiner as we've just described. But if you go to the performer list record and for whatever reason you haven't actually completed the employment change yourself, so that first stage in the process hasn't been initiated, then you need to do that first. It then needs to go through the approvals of the practice and the ICB because you're a partner, and then the pension contributions can be initiated through the joiner form. As I mentioned earlier, that's then all backdated, and then only after that will you be able to see that employee contribution statement with all of the contributions populated, but then also be able to submit your Type 1 form. So appreciate there's quite a lot of detail in that, but there are some people who find themselves in that situation, so it's important that you know how the different things kind of join together or need to be joined together before you would be able to submit your 22-23 form if that applies to you. And we do, speak to practices a lot about trying to keep these things up to date and do them in a timely fashion so that you don't have these issues when it comes to your 22, 23 or any end of year certificate that you're trying to complete. But in the here and now, if it's something that needs to be done retrospectively, then that all needs to happen, and then you would be able to submit your Type 1 form. Okay, so this one is someone who had looked at their employee contribution statement on PCSE Online. It was blank, there was nothing there for them to see contributions wise, but they know that they've had contributions deducted, and the practice has had contributions deducted for a number of years. So that scenario, the most likely reason for that is that the GP has more than one login for PCSE Online. They might not be aware of this, but they essentially, when they log into PCSE Online, then they will always see if that's the correct login that's attached to their pension and performer account, then they will always see not only the pensions button, but the details of their employee contributions when they go to that employee contribution statement. So if it is blank and there's no contributions there, then the likelihood is that at some point someone has created an account for them to access PCSE Online. It might have been a few years ago before pensions went live, and it might have been something to do with ordering supplies or something like that. And then that's the login that they've used, but it needs to be the one that's attached to the performer account. So if you're uncertain of that and which login you should be using, then if you contact our customer service centre, they can also check for multiple accounts for you. Okay, this is quite a common one. A few people have noticed, or a number of people have noticed, that in some instances the November 22 contribution month, if you like, there was an extra line which has a negative number. It might be a relatively small figure, financial sum, but it was a negative number. And the reason that came about is that some people had a tier rate change when the new tier rates came in from the 1st of October, but by the time the system was able to be uplifted to apply the new tier rates, then for a number of people the October contributions had already been calculated and deducted. So when the new tiers were applied, if the GP was on 14.5% in April to September, then the new tier rate table that applied from October would have put them on 13.5%. So it meant that if October's amount had been taken based on 14.5, because the old tiers were still in the system at that point, then there was an automatic correction in November, which set that back to the amount that would be due to be deducted when the 13.5% was applied. So that amount you can see is a negative figure. It's just the difference there. The key is the full amount for the 6-month period and the full amount for the 12-month period. It's all of the lines added together, but it just explains why there is that negative line, because it does stand out as odd to people. We've had a few people who've looked at their employee contribution statement and saw that they were expecting anyway to see some work they'd done for an out-of-hours provider. They assumed that would be showing as the solo income type, but they couldn't see any record of that. They know that the employer was deducting contributions from them every month, but they couldn't see any record of that. So what we've found in most of those scenarios is that some people are working for a provider who is perhaps an independent employing authority or another type of organisation where the pension is deducted as an officer post and not a practitioner post. So that's a really key point, that if you have a partner income, then you may have other roles that are pensioned through the officer route and not the practitioner route. So you wouldn't see them through PCSE Online. When you go to the My Pensions app to see your full data on that side, then you would clearly have access to your officer details. And I think there's one more on this screen. So this is another one that has come up a few times, really. So Type 1 practitioner, but they're seeing when they go into their employee contribution statement that their contributions are shown as monthly salary and not profit share and other income, I think it says. So they've become a Type 1 practitioner either at the start of the 22-23 year, or perhaps a little bit before that, or sometime during 22-23, but their contributions are still showing as monthly salary. Now, what that means is that, again, it's a little bit similar to the GP who started a brand new role at practice as a partner, not seeing anything on their statement. This time, the GP has swapped roles from salaried GP to partner. There needs to be the completion of a pensions leaver form on PCSE Online to break the association as a salaried GP with the practice. So let's say the salaried post ended on the 31st of March 22 and the GP became a partner from the 1st of April 2022. Well, the practice manager, practice administrator needs to complete a pensions leaver form to say that that salaried post has stopped on the 31st of March, and then they need to complete a pensions joiner form to say that the GP has become a partner from the 1st of April 2022. When that's done, then again, you'll see your employee contribution statement will correct, and then you will see the contribution showing as partner or profit share rather than salaried. Again, it's still currently anyway all tied to what your performer record says, so you also need to make sure you've submitted that, and there isn't a type of employment change on your performer list screen, but it's a change of role or change of professional status, I think it is what you see, and that's you changing from salaried to principal GP, and that all needs to be done, and then the practice can do that, break the association that you had as a salaried GP and commence a relationship, if you like, to show that you are a partner from whatever the appropriate date is. And only once these things have all been played through will you be able to then submit first of all, see your employee contribution statement updated, and then submit your type 1 form. So hopefully all of that makes sense. So we're going to go straight into the form itself now, I think, and this runs on and just takes you through an example of a submission. So once I have logged into PCSE Online, then to start my type 1 certificate, the first thing I need to do is click the GP Pensions and Payments button, and then on my screen I'll have a pensions option, and then I have a number of different options within the pension space. So the one that I'm looking for is Annual Certificate Type 1. Annual Certificate Forms, and then this will bring up the Type 1 entry screen. So we can see here that the screen has populated with my fictitious name, fictitious SD number, pension scheme membership number, and GMC number. So the first thing I need to do is to select the practice that I'm going to complete the type 1 form for. So I have this practice here. If I was a partner at more than one practice, then I would have multiple options to choose from in the drop down. So I've selected that practice. I will then need to select the financial year. So we're looking to complete 22-23 and just click OK to confirm. And then the practice ODS code, contract type, etc. will populate on my screen. If I have left the practice during the year, then I would complete the date in box K, but I have been there the full year, so we simply move on, save and next, and this is where we start to put our key data in. Now we are on to the Employee Contributions tab, which is where you'll start to see some changes compared to previous year's Type 1 forms. Just for ease of viewing, we can hide the left-hand navigation column and just blow the page up a little bit more. And you can see here that the box 46 populates automatically with box 36, just like the form on the NHS Pensions website. The solo income has also pulled through from box 37, as you would expect. And if there's any locum income, etc., to be added, then this is where it would be declared. So if we scroll down to box 54 and 54A, then this is where the annualised income for the 2 6-month periods is entered. So using the annualisation calculator on the NHS Pensions website, then we have our figures. The April to September income annualised comes out at 16,395.37 on the calculator, and October to March 10,195.37. All of the solo work in this instance was done in the first half of the year. So when we plug the figures into the calculator from the NHS Pensions website, this is what the annualised amounts come out at. So what we then need to do is to check what tier rate would be applicable for each period. So box 54, 16,395 for April to September. If you scroll up to the top of the page, you can see the tier rates just by clicking here. We've got 5.6 for April to September. So if we just go and populate that, 5.6%, and then 10,195.37 in October to March, so 10,195 in that second period gives us 5.1% for the tier rates there. So we can click here. There we go. So then we come to the part where the pensionable profit is apportioned. We're going to go with the standard method, which would give us 183 days in April to September and 182 days October to March. Again, there's guidance on this on the NHS Pensions website. Our solo work was all done in the first half of the year, as I mentioned, so our 3,100 goes here, and these are the figures then that will be used to calculate the contributions due. So if we click Save and Next again, and we can see here that our figures are populating. Now, we can click Hide Navigation menu just to bring up the full screen and make it easier to see. We can see that 5.6% tier rates has populated here, calculating the contributions due at 296.21 for employees, and we had already paid £300 for that period through the estimate process from the practice. So there's a slight overpayment in the employee contributions there, and then the employer contributions, then again we have a bit of an overpayment there. So that has calculated for us and brought them together as a total for the 6 months. We then go to the solo income, where it's calculated that on 5.6% the employee contributions were 173.60, but the solo provider has paid 164.60 for that period, probably on 5%, so slight underpayment there. And we've got our employer contributions again. So again, we've got the 6 month period figures here. We then move on to the next 6 months. So this is taking us to the next tab. Again, if we want to check, then we can go back to bring up the navigation menu, and we can see that we're now on October to March. I'll hide that again because it is easier to see the full screen. And again, we've got the calculations due calculated based on the 5.1% tier rate now for October to March, and that's then compared to what has already been deducted through the practice estimate process. Again, for employer contributions, we've got that calculation, and we've got the overall difference for the 6 months. If we go to solo, then we don't have any solo contributions to calculate. We didn't have any solo contributions paid for the period, so that's why we have 0 in here. So we save next, and this will take us through now to where I can enter any additional information that applies. use the upload button to upload any documents that I need to upload. And if I have an accountant or advisor acting on my behalf, then I can populate their details here, and that will save into my PCSE online submission. So we are now on the declaration page. Let's just click back to the menu to show that, so we can see that the declaration page is highlighted. I will hide this again so we can see the screen a lot easier. So what we can see here is that the pensionable profit for the year has populated as expected, and then I have the choice of opting to have any solo adjustments collected through my main practice contract, which is the more straightforward approach. So I'm going to leave that ticked rather than switching to trying to go to the solo employing authority or the out of hours provider, whoever I've worked for, to get those adjustments sorted. So if I keep that on the main practice contract, then any adjustments will be added together. I just need to confirm that where I've included the agent details for my accountant or advisor, then that they can be used by PCSE. So that's just coming up with a message there because I haven't actually entered anything in the page, so that's a good reminder. So what we can see then is that we have our two-tier rates that have pulled through. So we had 5.6% for the first 6 months and 5.1% for the second half of the year. The full contributions due as calculated, 73810, already paid for the full year is 7060, so there's a slight overpayment there, which will be a refund back to the practice of 3250. When it comes to employer contributions, then we've got again a bit of an overpayment. 217 to 85 had been collected against 196286. Again, remembering this is all test data, but for illustration purposes, there's an adjustment there of 207.99 of an overpayment. So putting these two figures together from box 114 and 111, then that is the amount that's due to go back to the practice. So that's 240.49 will be refunded in the next contractual payment run to my practice. I click submit, and that's the end of the process. Okay, so that's a detailed view of what flows through when you go through the Type 1 form on PCSE online. Just want to pick up some of the questions that were fairly specifically related to the completion of the form, and there's another couple of bits of functionality that we want to show you this evening as well. So, and I think we kind of get onto this a little bit, but this is where someone has started to complete the form and they've gone back in later on and they've gone to that Type 1 form page, and when they've tried to select 2223, it says it's already started or completed and they're not able to pull the form up from there. So what you need to do if you see that, then even if you haven't completed very much information at all in the form already, the system will have saved it as a draft. So I think one of the next very short videos shows us the listing screen that's part of the Type 1 functionality. Go to that listing screen, and if you click search in there, it will return all of the forms that you have previously had processed. So it will show all of your approved forms, etc. But it will also show a draft status for this 2223 form that you've started to complete. So you're able to go back and amend that and kind of carry on with the completion to get that submitted. This is someone who's been getting an error when they try to go into the Type 1 form button, so they don't get very far at all. And this will, generally speaking, be someone who the system doesn't recognise from a pensions perspective as a Type 1 practitioner. So it is most likely to be that similar scenario to what we said, or I described when I was talking about the employee contribution statement, which is where the GP may have been a salaried GP who has then switched to being a partner at the same practice, but all of the kind of lever to end the salaried and joiner to start the partner hasn't yet been completed. Or indeed, it's someone who has started a practice brand new as a partner, but and it's the first time they've been a partner, but again, these earlier processes that need to be completed are still either partway through or haven't been initiated at all. The route to fixing that is to go back through those steps the same as I described for the employee contribution statement conundrum. This is where someone has noticed that they don't have the April to September tab on their PCSE Online form menu when they have gone to complete the form. So as you will have seen if you've used PCSE Online before for your Type 1 form, or you certainly have seen on that demonstration video, all of the different tabs are shown down the left hand side of the form, and that navigation menu can be hidden so that you have a kind of better access to the data on the screen. Those tabs that go down that left hand side on the Type 1 form are exactly the same as the tabs that you see if you open up the Excel version of a Type 1 form from the NHS Pensions website. But the PCSE Online system has been configured so that if someone started as a Type 1 GP from October onwards in 22-23, then it will only show that October to March tab for completion, and the April to September tab will be hidden effectively. You won't see it. And then vice versa, if someone has worked from the 1st of April or in that first half of the pension year but ended that employment, then it won't show the October to March tab. So you'll still have the total contributions for the year page, but you will only have that 1 6-month period visible. Why am I unable to select the 22-23 in the drop down? So this was more with reference to the certificate screen itself. So the Type 1 screen, we talked a lot about it in relation to the employee contribution statement, but to be honest, it's really the same causes. Again, that's telling us that you've not been associated with as a partner at the practice. So we need to go back to those steps with making sure that the joiners, leavers and performer list bits are all done. This is more around someone who has their accountant completing the form on their behalf by the sounds of it, and then but using PCSE Online. So the accountant has advised the GP that they've submitted a draft, and the GP doesn't know or is asking what they need to do now, I think is the scenario. So the accountant has submitted a draft into the system technically, so they've created a draft. That draft doesn't come through to PCSE. That's a status of the form that says it's awaiting the GP to complete the declaration. So the GP needs to go into PCSE Online, go to that all-important listing screen button again, do the search. That will return the form that the accountant has completed, and then the GP just needs to click on the hyperlink to open that form, check the details, and then click the declaration button and then click submit, and that comes straight through then to PCSE. So that's then with us. But when the accountant has done their part and it's waiting for the GP, it hasn't actually been submitted. PCSE don't get to see that in the same way. So just making sure from a GP perspective that the GP does log in and click that declaration and submit. And then we've also got someone who would like their accountant to be able to get into PCSE Online, I think, to complete their Type 1 form, presumably, if they asked about it on the Type 1 webinar, but the accountant doesn't have a login. So the user administrator for PCSE Online at the practice needs to assign user roles and user accounts for PCSE Online access. So and to contact the user administrator if that accountant has never ever had any need to log into PCSE Online before, so they don't actually have a username and password to use. Then what the user administrator will do is create a new portal account using the email address that the accountant wants to use to log in, and then the accountant will receive a verification link. So much like when you register for all sorts of other systems, the accountant will receive a verification link. They will then click on that, set their password, and then they'll be able to log in. So that's set at your practice level. It's the practice user administrator that needs to do that. Okay, so this is just a short run through of that listing screen that I've already mentioned. This shows you what it looks like. Now, once we have submitted a certificate, then if we want to just check that it has actually gone through, then if you go back to the annual certificate button and this time go to the listing screen, then if we click search, we'll see that our certificate here has got a status of declarated, and that means that it is now waiting for PCSE to review. Once it has been reviewed by PCSE, then that declaration status will change to approved, hopefully, if everything's fine with it, or if there are any issues, then it will change to rejected. Okay, and this just runs on then to what happens when PCSE have actually reviewed the certificate. So again, a very short snippet. If I then go back to my listing screen and then just search again for my certificate, then we can see that it is now showing as status approved, and that's it. That's the process completed. The adjustment that was due to be paid back to the practice will be in the next available contractual statement, and if nothing changes, that is all I have to do. You will see that if you scroll to the right, there is a resubmit button. So if something was to come to light at a later date where I needed to make an amendment to this certificate, then if I click resubmit, it will effectively create a new draft, and I will be able to make any updates to the certificate. But as I said, then that really, for the vast majority of people, will be the end of the process. So it's just a couple of screenshots really to bring to life some of the things that we mentioned in those earlier questions. I think I mentioned about someone saying, well, I've gone into the Type 1 screen, so I've clicked on the Type 1 button and I've went to select 22-23, but it says it's already initiated stroke completed. So as we'd mentioned earlier, it's back to that listing screen again. So this time, clicking search again, you can sort the forms in order of financial year, but you can just easily see that the declaration status of this particular form is draft. And if you scroll to the right, if you so wish to, you can completely delete a draft. But if you just want to continue from where you left off, then all you need to do is click on the blue hyperlink of the form ID. That will open your Type 1 form up. If there's any corrections or changes to anything that you've entered already that you need to make, then you're able to do that. Or, as I say, you can just carry on where you've left off. But if for any reason you wish to delete it completely whilst it's still in draft format, then you can do that. It hasn't come through the system as such. So that just shows you, let's see, how important it is just to keep that listing screen in mind, because if you see something here then that says it's already initiated and you think, well, hang on a minute, I haven't actually completed that, go straight to the listing screen and you should find your draft. Okay, so just want to cover a few bits about reconciliation of contributions, because we get a lot of questions about this and what the different processes are. So it really does depend on the income type that we're talking about, but let's concentrate first of all on the partner income and through the practice contributions. So taking a step back, the practice has submitted an estimate, an annual estimate form, hopefully before the 1st of April of 22-23. And when they did that, then the monthly contributions that were deducted throughout the course of the 22-23 year were based on that estimated pensionable pay or pensionable profits that they'd entered on the estimate form for you as a Type 1 GP, and the tier rates that they selected. We've already talked about the fact that the tier rates then changed halfway through the year, but those monthly contributions that were deducted from the practice were deducted based on the estimate details that the practice themselves provided. And that's really important. When you've then gone to complete your Type 1 form for 22-23, if that reconciliation is such that pension contributions have been overpaid, so if the estimated income that was entered on the estimate form actually was more than the profit share that the GP partner or non-GP partner ended up taking home, then the practice would receive a refund for the overpaid contributions in the next contractual statement. So after that certificate has been processed, that's automatically calculated and automatically paid along with the practice's monthly contractual payment, and they'll see it in the statement as a refund back. If, on the other hand, the estimate, and I have to say we do see it this way around a lot more, the estimate was completed and when it's come to the end of year reconciliation, your actual pensionable profit is more than the estimated pensionable pay, then it means that obviously the monthly contributions that have been so far collected for 22-23 are not sufficient. They've only been collected based on that estimated income, and so an adjustment is automatically calculated by the system for the difference and deducted from the practice in the next contractual statement. So we do mention in all of the sessions with the practices, I think I said it right at the start, but the estimated income, estimated pensionable pay, as close as they can get that, then it's in their interest, because then there are no hefty, large, significant end of year adjustments when the partners or the salaried GPs submit their end of year forms. And we also stress that if things change throughout the year, then when you're in year, the practice can submit a revised estimate, or they can also submit a salary change form for a salaried GP. So, and these things, again, as long as they do them through PCSE online, they're automatically applied in a timely fashion, and it just keeps everything right. But when you get to your end of year form, by that point, it kind of is what it is. So if the scenario is that there is quite a difference between what you've ended up with in pensionable profit compared to what was entered in the estimate, then the practice will see those adjustments. That is just the way the NHS pensions rules have to be applied. So that's your partner income. For those of you who do any solo work, then there is that option on, and I think the demo showed it, there is the option on the Type 1 form for you to tick to say that you want to have any adjustments, so underpayments or overpayments applied through the practice. And as long as that's ticked, then that is also then very straightforward, because those adjustments are applied in the same way as mentioned in the partner income. Now, it's much more likely to be the tier rate ended up being different to what the solo provider had assumed whenever they've been deducting and paying over monthly contributions for you. So that needs to then be reconciled. So the only difference then is if box O is ticked to say that you want to get things reconciled directly with the solo provider rather than through your sort of partnership practice, then PCSE needs to go off to that solo provider and advise them that there is an underpayment or indeed an overpayment. But if there's an underpayment, then we need to wait for them to make that payment. And once the provider has paid those arrears, then it's only at that point that we can fully reconcile the certificate and that your pension record can be updated. So that's the solo income. And then locum, if you do, some of you might do locum work, some Type 1 GPs do. And that locum work is pensioned, if you decide to pension it, it's pensioned through you submitting locum A and B forms every month or every period, and you make the payments for the contributions due at the same time. So they should reconcile. But again, you might have that tier rate scenario where you thought your pensionable pay was going to put you into one tier bracket, but then you've ended up in a different tier bracket. If you've overpaid in employee contributions, then, as a result of the tier rate, etc., then PCSE will arrange a refund or submit a refund request for that to be paid direct to yourself, because you've paid those contributions direct in the first place. If you've underpaid though, so if your tier rates ended up higher than you thought, then again, PCSE will contact you direct, or whoever has submitted the certificate on your behalf, to say, we can't process that until you've made that the payment for the arrears. Now, when you're going to use PCSE Online to submit your form, if you have got any locum income, then you need to do that reconciliation piece and then submit your form. Okay, just a quick mention on PCSE terminology, I suppose, is closed practices. I guess what we really mean is practices where the contract has ended. So by the time you get to submitting your 22-23 form in this end of year window, it might be that the practice you worked for during that year no longer is in contract. So if there's been a merger, then the practice that kind of took over, the practice that fully merged practice is responsible for, under NHS pensions rules, they're responsible for the contributions. So nothing really changes compared to what I've described previously there. But if the contract's completely ended and there isn't a merger, then employee contributions, either if they're underpaid, the partner would expect to pay those contributions. If they've been overpaid, employee contributions would be refunded. But there is a bit of a question over employer contributions, and this is something that NHS England are looking at. So we need to be aware that if you're unfortunate enough to be in that scenario, which won't be many people, but if you are, then it's going to take longer to get your certificate reconciled, because these queries need to be resolved first of all, I'm afraid. Similarly, if an out of hours provider no longer is, that you worked for in the pension year, no longer is in contract, then adjustments can't be made directly with them. So if you have got solo work, then the prudent thing to do is to have that adjusted through the practice. But if you've opted not to, and you may decide not to, then again, these things need to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, and our experience is that it's taking quite a while to get the necessary guidance. PCSE can't make these decisions on their own, I'm afraid. So hopefully it doesn't affect many people on the call, but just so that you're aware of those scenarios. Okay, just want to quickly touch on end of year payments. So I want to be very, very clear that NHS England, the expectation is that practices and GP partners, non-GP partners, let the processes flow through. So the system has been designed, as we've talked quite a lot about already, to calculate any adjustments that are necessary to reconcile a Type 1 practitioner's end of year form. We do know, however, though, that some practices, some accountants have been very clear that they want to make these payments up front. They don't want to have to wait for the certificate to be processed. So if that is the case, then we have created a template that absolutely must be completed if any of these payments are being made, and the guidance is there in the Type 1 guide to explain that. Any payments such as this would need to be made and processed before you can use PCSE Online to submit your end of year form. So, as I say, the direction and steer from NHS England is to submit the form and let the adjustment process take effect where it's required. But if you are looking to make the payment upfront, you need to do that and then wait for it to be updated on the employee contribution statement, so that the Type 1 submission on PCSE Online is reconciled and doesn't end up with a second deduction to the practice. Okay, so lots of information there. Some more questions from the stuff we pulled out from the last webinar, and then we'll get on to a bit of looking at the questions that have come in the chat. So this is a key one actually to focus on. So we've been talking really only about PCSE Online and that employee contribution statement, and then the Type 1 form when it's been processed on the system, whether that is because you've submitted it directly on the system, or even that we've processed it because you've submitted it through the old route, but how is that status showing on PCSE Online of the form? That doesn't mean that your NHS pensions record has been updated. The NHS pension system can only be updated in sequential order, so that's not something that PCSE has any control over. So if a GP has a gap in their record because, let's take an example, the form they submitted for 2020-21, there was an issue with it, it had to be sent back to flag that there was an issue, and that issue, for whatever reason, hasn't been resolved. Perhaps it wasn't resubmitted or whatever, but it hasn't been resolved. So there is that gap. Now, last year, 21-22 form might have came in, processed beautifully, no problems. PCSE Online will show that as approved. This 22-23 form, if you submit it and there's no problems with it, PCSE Online would then show that as approved. But because 2020-21 is still outstanding, the NHS pensions record on the My Pensions app would only show contributions up to the end of March 2020. So you wouldn't, so although all of that work's been done on PCSE Online, then we've not been able to update it yet on NHS Pensions Online system because of that gap here. So when you're checking that listing screen, if you see any gaps and there's not an approved certificate, then you need to be aware that if you've not sent that in, that you need to send that in to us so that we can get that also resolved. And then once we've got that missing certificate or that gap here fully reconciled, then those other years can be added onto your record in sequential order straight away after that. Okay. Back to these payment templates again, just another reminder that NHS England Finance would prefer that you didn't use those templates, but if you have done, this question is about which tier rate should I use if there are two, okay, if there are two different tier rates in the year. Again, an important point is that these payments are always applied to a GP's record on PCSE Online as March of the pension year. So you have to be aware of that whenever you're completing the form and doing the reconciliation. So it would be that tier rate that applies in the second half of the year. This is a bit more back to PCSE Online on when you're trying to create a Type 1 form and you get the list of financial years. If you've been a GP for a number of years, you'll have a number of years in that list. I think people panic when they see some of the years listed in red, and they think that means that we haven't had any forms for them. You forget what you see on there. If you go to the listing screen, as we've sort of shown, and you can click on financial year if you like to put them in order. Personally, I quite like doing that, but you don't have to. You can just look at them as they are. But if you put them in order, then that will show you the status of each of those years if we process them. So it might very well be the case that all of your previous years you sent through what we would now call the old-fashioned route, so through the Contact Us form. We've processed them and keyed them manually, and they're showing as approved on your record. That's it. There's nothing else to do. It's only where there is no form showing for the year that you need to consider it. They're just in red there because technically it is selectable to complete it in the system from scratch if it hasn't been done through the system before. But as long as it's showing as approved on the listing screen, then you don't have to worry about it. So that's another key point, really. This one's a bit of a technical one about apportioning the income on the form if you're using the system. So you're in PCSE Online and you're looking at the boxes where the income is apportioned. So the standard split that's programmed into the system if the GP's worked all year is 183 days. First half and 182 days. Second half, as this question has pointed out. And I think the scenario here is where the GP and the accountant have decided that maybe the scenario could be something like they've been a partner for the whole year, but they did a certain amount of sessions in the first 6 months, and maybe they doubled up on their sessions in the next 6 months. So that it's not a 50-50 apportionment on the pensionable profit for the year. And NHS Pensions did decide, after we sort of done the initial development on the system, that actually it was perfectly feasible for the accountant or GP to be able to decide that. And so that the boxes, although you would expect them to auto-populate on the 183 and 182 days ratio, the apportionment of the income could be overwritten effectively. So that has been added as an extra system requirement, but it's not live yet because that was a change that came after the development was done. So I suppose you've got two options. We're expecting the change to go live into the system next Thursday night, I think. So there'll be still something like 9 or 10 days, I think, till the deadline at that point. So you can hold back and wait and complete that. Or if you use the Excel version of the form and send it in the old-fashioned route, you will be able to overwrite those boxes. So that just explains that. Again, won't apply to many people, I suspect, although I don't know for sure. But so for everybody who standard apportionment applies, then they can readily use PCSE Online. I should also say that if you haven't worked the full year, then you can enter the number of days that you have worked in each of the periods, so it's not that it's defaulting to the full year for everybody, but this is only when it's someone who the decision is that they want to apportion their income differently. And this one is, again, will the 22-23 certificate be accepted if last year's certificate isn't showing as approved? So I guess this is someone who is looking at the listing screen, so that's good. And they're seeing that maybe, I'm not sure actually whether it's not there at all for the 21-22 form, or maybe it's showing as rejected if they did it on PCSE Online. It doesn't matter which of those scenarios the GP who asked this question is in. It's absolutely fine to submit your 22-23 form. That comes in as a separate submission. It's assessed on its own merit, and the only impact then is, so let's just say that's all fine and we're able to approve it. It's back to that impact of if 21-22 is missing or is effectively missing because it had to be rejected, then until that's resubmitted and reconciled, then the pensions online record can't be updated for 22-23 because we've got that gap from last year, if that makes sense. This person has been a salaried GP and then they've become a partner. Do I need to do two forms? I think I covered that at the very start actually tonight. So yes, the answer is you need to do a type 2 form for your salaried post and a type 1 form for the partner post. Apologies, but that's how the rules are applied. And then we've got just some links to some resources. So PCSE website, but I'd also encourage you to look at the NHS Pensions website.
So there's a question in the chat regarding practitioner pay and officer pay. So as a GP, you can be in different parts of the NHS pension scheme. That is the practitioner and the officer. On the type 1 or type 2 form, you only put your practitioner pay. Your officer pay will go directly to NHS pensions and your record will be amalgamated by NHS pensions separately. So just to clarify, on your type 1 or type 2 form, you only submit practitioner pay. Another question I just want to pick up is in relation to the annualisation calculator, which is available on the NHS Pensions website. Some individuals aren't able to add additional rows when working out their pay. That's because Microsoft sometimes disables the macros. So if you download the file on your desktop, right-click and press Properties, it will allow you to enable the macros, therefore allow you to add additional rows so that you can do each 6-month period. If you work the whole 12 months, you could do the 1st of April to the 30th of September, and then the second period from the 1st of October to the 31st of March for each of your roles. I just wanted to clarify also that the annualisation calculator is essentially to calculate the correct tier. You only use that tier to come back to the type 1 or type 2 form. The annualised income is not used on the type 1 or type form. It is the actual pensionable pay that is used on the type 1 or type 2 form.
I think there's a question for that scenario where someone has changed from a salaried GP to a partner. I think the question is how that will play out on the GP's contribution record. So we're well past the end of 22-23, aren't we? So let's just say the whole year was showing as monthly salary because they hadn't been updated to showing as they've been a partner. If that's now done, then there will be a kind of minus amount for against all of those monthly salary contributions showing, which would effectively zero it. But the partner joiner being completed at the same time, the deductions will show for the partner post, all on that employee contribution statement. As we showed right at the very beginning, you can filter the employee contribution statement separately on the different income types, so you can kind of see, you'll be able to do that to see that the salaried contributions cancel out to zero, and then the partner contributions start. And whether or not they're a direct replacement for each other on the practice statement, which might also be part of the question, will depend on whether it's the same estimated income. So if somebody also changes the estimated income when they enter the joiner for the partner post, even though it's retrospectively, then that will also show. So you do have it from both ends, really.
So there's a question here about how you work out pensionable tiers for individuals that have a different year end. So the NHS pension year is from the 1st of April to the 31st of March. And you would use the pension contributions within that time, the pensionable earning in that time, to work out the pension tier. For someone who's got a different year end, you would just need to adjust that for their tax return to incorporate the correct months. But for the pension purposes, which is a different process, it is the 1st of April to the 31st of March that you would use. One other thing, obviously this year is much more complicated because we've had a tier change mid-year on the 1st of October. Members will be happy to know that going forward, so on the 1st of April, there'll only be one tier change. So the next 12 months, there won't be a tier change mid-year. The tier change will happen on the 1st of April 24.
I think there's a few people asking again about things that are showing as completed stroke initiated. So getting back to that listing screen, then you would see a draft form if that's the case. We have come across some people, I think, and there might be a reason for it, but they've submitted the form both ways. So they've submitted it through the Contact Us form, which means PCSE have keyed it and processed it. So let's say we're talking about the 21-22 form, and it may be that they started a draft before they did that on the system. So if there is anything like that, and you can see that the form that you submitted through Contact Us is showing as approved on your listing screen, then you can ignore that old draft that you created, or you can delete that if you want your screen to look a bit tidier, but it won't impact on anything. We've got someone saying that this form is showing as status pending. Pending is when it's waiting for GP to do the declaration. So that's normally why it shows as pending. Someone who has an accountant user role type, it's done the initial step and then it's waiting for the GP.
There's a couple of questions in relation to some members where they've got a year missing. If that is the case, you can either contact PCSE via the Contact Us to raise a case. If you're a BMA member, you can contact us via the first point of contact, and we can help support to help resolve and correct that missing year. As Katrina mentioned, it's really important to do that because your record is updated sequentially. Say, for example, 15-16 is missing and you've done every subsequent year, your record may not be up to date. As soon as that 15-16 slots into place, all the subsequent years will fall into place and your full record can then be updated. So it's really important to ensure that's the case. Contact PCSE, contact the BMA, and we can help you do that.
Like you said, Christian, quite a few questions about missing certificates, missing years and gaps in records and so on. Someone who's can see all of their contribution statements until 22-23 on PCSE Online and the same annual statements. So if by that we mean a Type 1 form that's approved until 22-23, on the NHS pensions, the statement only goes up to 2019. So one thing to point out, I suppose you might have touched on it a little bit, Christian, but the NHS pensions statements only get refreshed at certain times of the year. So if updates to your record have been added, so we've mentioned this whole thing about the sequential order, etc. If they've been updated since last June, there hasn't been a refresh by NHS Pensions of the total reward statement data since then. So it would be the next summer refresh before you would see that.
Yeah, so if I can help, there's quite a time gap between a submission date and when NHS Pensions is updated. So to give you an example, in 2022, the deadline was the 28th of February 2022. PCSE then processed that, hand that data over to PCSE, and then it's updated in the following summer. So essentially, for the year end 31st of March 21, we do the form 28th of February 22, and it's updated on NHS Pensions in August of 22. So between the 31st of March 21 and August 22, that is the gap, which is nearly 16 months for NHS Pensions to update your record. So if forms are submitted mid-year, the NHS Pensions record on their systems are normally only updated in time for August. In the previous couple of years, they have done a second refresh in December, but that's now going to stop. So it'll only be in August that records are updated. So there is quite a gap between time when records are submitted to PCSE and NHS Pensions updated.
Yeah, and I think that's a difficult point for people, isn't it, sometimes to get. So if the first thing that we're suggesting you do is you're looking at your PCSE online record and making sure that you've got certificates shown as approved for all of the years. And as Krishan said, that then depending on when those were approved, and if the 2021 one was done quite recently, PCSE would then have been able to add all of the contributions to your NHS pensions record, but you wouldn't see that you won't have a new statement until this coming summer, August time. So there's quite a few questions about how long it takes for NHS pensions to be updated. The deadline for the submissions this year has been extended to the 31st of March. NHS Pensions extended the deadline, because of the complications of the change of tier rates, etc. That 31st of March date is Easter Sunday, so it's right in the middle of a bank holiday weekend. So I guess it's just to point that out. It is the deadline. The systems will still be alive and you'll still be able to do submissions, but clearly there won't be anyone at PCSE, so it might be prudent to use the cut-off as an indicator, but to aim for a little bit sooner. That's just to mention that. We've got someone who's saying that they've submitted a 2021 form more than once and they don't know why there's a problem, so they've had to resubmit it. If it's been submitted on PCSE online, then there is a little sort of fairly short text box that you will see that should be populated with an indication of what the issue is. Quite a character restriction on that box, to be honest, so you will have some information to tell you why it was rejected. If you submitted it through the Contact Us route, then whoever the email address that was on the Contact Us submission form is the email address that the notification around the certificate not being able to be processed and why, that's where that will have gone back to. So just to point that out, if someone has submitted that on your behalf, then it's the email address that they've entered that the correspondence will have gone back to. Someone asking about declarated as a status. That means that the pension scheme member has submitted, so they've completed the full certificate, they've confirmed the declaration page, so it's the equivalent of signing it, and submitted it to PCSE, and it means it's waiting for PCSE to review it and update the status to either approved, hopefully, or in some cases obviously rejected, as we've mentioned.
I appreciate that some records that have missing years. One of the things that I would really recommend is obviously you can look at PCSE's website, as Katrina's mentioned, to look at what status your forms are, whether they're approved, and what's on the listing screens. You can also then contact NHS Pensions to see what's come across. It is unfortunately very complicated because there are two different time periods. PCSE are looking at essentially you're 11 months behind at the pension year end, and NHS Pensions maybe another 6 months behind. But by looking at your PCSE record and contacting NHS Pensions, you'll be able to determine which years are missing, and then in doing so, you can then start that process to try and fill those gaps. And it may be that certificates may be required, it may be other things are missing, but obviously you can either contact PCSE. If you're a BMA member, we can help you with those missing years. But as I mentioned earlier, it's sequential years, so it's really important to go back and get those missing years in order so that your record can be updated.
Thank you, Christian. I think we've got a couple of people who may have sort of individual either user account or technical type issues with their access. Someone's said they've got an issue being unable to view statements on the system. When you ring PCSE, the call handlers say they can't see details. So I think the listing screen, I don't know how long ago it was that the call was made, but the listing screen was temporarily unavailable for a few weeks. So if by statements you mean type 1 forms that have been submitted, then it is true that for I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, the call centre agents couldn't see that functionality. They can now. I'm assuming by statements, that's what you mean. Practice statements, there's not been any issue with anybody viewing them, or employee contribution statements. Someone's asked about the listing screen showing already initiated, completed, however a message of no records can be found. It's not the listing screen that shows the already initiated, completed. So that's what you see when you go to the type 1 button, as though you're trying to create a type 1 form, and it's when you go to the financial year bit that would say against the year already initiated, completed. When you go to the listing screen, then that's when you would see the certificates in whatever status they're at. So I think there's a question about why is there a rush? You know, if the records can be updated later, why is there a rush? And I guess it's a requirement. GPs who have pensionable income complete their certificates on time. There's no actual penalty for not doing that at the minute, if that makes sense. But as Christian's pointed out already, there are various kind of cut-offs that if something isn't submitted by a certain deadline and then it's not then going to be processed and contributions are not going to be updated in time for NHS pensions refreshes, then I guess the implication and the impact of that is that you don't see your pension contributions on your pension record. But it's right to say that there's no actual penalty like we get for late tax returns and stuff like that as it stands.
Katrina, sorry,
yeah,
can I just
Janet,
interject? It's under statutory legislation that
yes,
they complete that form by the deadline.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose by requirement I should have said statutory legislation.
Please do keep an eye out for the updated FAQs on the PCSE website. Thank you.